evening to you, and welcome to this program of Rodney Groundings. I'm your host, Deon Abrams, and on this evening's program, I have with me my usual companion, Brother Tacuma, and we will continue to examine the political and social landscape here in Guyana. I want to welcome you once again to Rodney Groundings, Brother Tacuma.
It's a pleasure.
Um, so we are to discuss a number of things that have been happening in the society. We had our Republic celebration, and we noted that a number of events were held, geared primarily at attracting an African audience. But the one that captured my mind mostly was this Stink and Dirty affair, which was sanctioned by the Ministry of Culture, um, and promoted by them as a national event in commemoration of the Republic anniversary. Now, I don't know, as an African activist, and Stink and Dirty associated with an activity promoted by a racist PPP government and targeting the African community in general. How do you analyze that in terms of the perception that these people may have of the black community and this Stink and Dirty business?
To be honest with you, I pay little attention to it. I was so appalled, and so annoyed that I almost refused to even read the various comments on it. But I know from what I glanced through, I happened to hear on some programs, the government have got a lot of pushback on it, and it signals the level of degeneration in government. It signals the political contempt that they have for the African community, and it signals also the willingness to exploit weaknesses among young Africans. They like party, they like all of these, I don't want to say loose culture, but I can't find a better description. And they know that we have these cultural weaknesses, and part of that is a consequence of slavery in community, where you're being deprived of your fundamental cultural tenets, and you gravitate to cultural behaviors that are not in your best interest, degenerate culture. And they exploit that, and they're trying to get political gains from it. And the thing have gotten so out of hand that they're not now even trying to cover, the behavior. And it's getting from bad to worse. And to introduce us, because basically what they're doing is introducing you as being Stink and Dirty.
That's the point of view.
And our young people,
they're catching it.
They catch it.
That this is the people's perception of us.
Perception of you.
Yeah, that we stink and we don't.
Right. And we can spend the nation funds to project it to the world.
So we are facilitating
our own demise. The same story that we had on the previous programs. When you raise these things, you would think it's joke.
Yeah. That is the whole point. That they are promoting us in this light.
Yeah.
And they are using agents who are believing that that money is the thing that we're going to get again from this, but they are destroying
the collective, and the nation. Because you're producing a whole set of young people, who, if you could manipulate them, so anybody else could manipulate them. But to me, the cultural aggression, the racist aggression from the state, those who control the state. I mean, if it was coming from like an Indian private sector, as bad as that may be, but when it's coming from the state, the highest level of governance, it is calculated racism. It's like genocide. It's like cultural genocide.
So I just thought I'd raise it here because I was going to write about it because the analysis of it and the root of it is in the racism of the people and their willingness to project African in a certain way, right? And they are are using a small clique of people whom really they are not seeing beyond
The dollars.
the dollars that they receive, right? But the collective mass of Africans, this is who you are, right? And this is what the world must see you as.
Stink and dirty.
Stink and dirty,
Yeah.
right? And the young people can't see that.
And I'm sure, I didn't see it, but I'm sure they just think on that. Because the banks are, banks are producing, giving them money to buy clothes,
Yeah.
clothing attendants. But anyway, I don't want us to spend too much
I
time on
heard
it.
one
Our
rate,
time is
you
done.
know,
This
saying that the rain,
disappears so quickly.
yeah, the rain was good, man. It can facilitate the
Stink and dirty
yeah, the
atmosphere.
stink and dirty atmosphere and all these things.
I get more sick. Let me continue. So let me exit this particular one.
tragedy,
It's a tragedy, you know. I just get to be more sick. Get to be sick right now.
The other brief thing that we want to raise is that police corporal was charged for manslaughter, reckless behavior and dealing with the chase of the two youths who died in the Mahaica accident. He's African Guyanese, of course. The two youths that died are East Indians. And that only happened about a month or so. What is your response in relation to the action that has been taken in this regard as against the Boston situation? How do we factor
I
these?
mean, the obvious thing is the speed in which they move. I mean, in principle, as a program, you know, we don't have no problem with the government or any agency, the state, to respond to these matters. You know, pursuing policemen, and if the behavior is found to be in a violation of the law, place them before the courts. We don't have no problem with that as a principle. But what's striking in this case is the speed in which they move the prosecution of the police in this matter, and the Boston matter, which is a very grievous matter. They take months.
Right.
Which convinced me the Boston matter was political, and they were involved. So they were saving the skin and protecting their own because they were criminally culpable in the matter.
But it also shows the contempt they have for black lives. Right. And we cannot run away from that. And so we have to continue to view the government for what it is. Right? SIP really doesn't care about black people in the country. They're willing to, in every way, deal with issues that are important to black people in a negative light.
It came under pressure from sections of the Indian community to prosecute.
I know.
And the prosecutor appeals the constituency.
Very quickly.
When we in the African community pressured them to prosecute in Boston, they got time with them. You know, so it's double standards.
Keep pressing it for one because they thought it would have died, but you had to keep it in the light.
It's more and more of the PVP in the same.
It's sad. Right? Well, two people have been committed to stand trial for the Henry Boyce killing. We spoke about that. We have discussed that, but what are your views? Because we did say that, it was we were concerned about the charges laid against the individuals. But I don't know what fresh thoughts you have.
I want us to remind the nation of the role we played in trying to get this matter, to remain in the forefront of the country, and it ultimately resulted in charges against the police officer. We did in Boston case. We also did the same thing, for the Henry Boyce, Joella and Isaiah. So we have been playing a very active role on this, and on the Joella and Isaiah case, we did quite a lot, to keep that in the public focus, and we struggled clearly to get justice for the victims. And I think that we have to continue. But as when we look at the process of it unfolding in the context of our own understanding of what believe played out there, we couldn't miss that the two persons who are being accused are more likely not to be the real persons who perpetuate the crime.
Right.
So while we want to continue to press for justice for the Henry boys, we don't want to contribute to a massive injustice of to Indo-Guyanese poor elements and the poor and the powerless, being made scapegoats by the PPP, okay, and being brought before a court on frame of charges. And as a program, we have to commit ourselves to pay keen attention to that trial and to expose and to bring our experience to what happened in that particular trial. Because on the one hand, yes, we want justice, but we want the real killers to be brought before the court, and we don't want frame of charge of two poor innocent men. And this is what the PP is doing. They're prepared to sacrifice them.
But it's a sad thing. Even this business of using people as pawns and scapegoats, even in the dam fire, we saw that and so on. It shows a callous regard because they are looking for the lumpen elements in the society. But regardless of who these people are, they are human beings. All right, they have lives. They are living there. They may be, contributing in some way to the society because they are going to be doing odd jobs for people and so on. But not because they're in that situation that they found themselves, that you're going to make them victims of some scheme that you have organized and allow the actual perpetrators to get walked.
You see, for them, because some people are dispensable, it's tragic.
Yeah,
so we have a duty as we fight for Joel and the Henry brothers, Joel and Isaiah. We also got to defend those comrades, and unless they could really bring convincing evidence before the court, we have to be equally active in that defense.
Yeah. So we just gotta keep watching and be alert on the procedures and the deliberations in court, so that I think you guys have fairly good representation, legal representation, because the lawyers have already begun to argue that that these are trumped up charges, and the denial by the victims also are factors that the court may want to take into consideration once there is evidence to support their claim that they were no wives responsible for what they're being accused of, right? But our society is one that is more degenerate than one that is on a progressive march. And despite the toutings of Jack Deal and the likes of him, I think if we continue along the line of progressing, that in spite of the apparent apathy and the apparent disconnect that the African community seems to have right now, that at some point their consciousness will be raised again, and their willingness to stand up and fight for what is just and right, that will come alive again. And when that happens, then we are hopeful that it doesn't result in something that is really catastrophic in the society. But you just can't keep pushing people backwards and putting them against the wall. And they have gotten to that wall, and there is nowhere else to turn. Then they're going to turn and head back right again. And they don't seem to recognize that. Right? you have some concerns about the national awards. What are these concerns?
Well, I mean, look, the government always, I mean, the president is saying he's committed to one Guyana, you know. But when you watch their behavior, it is consistent with the previous behavior. It's consistent behavior. They develop a hostility to national awards when they came to power in '92. Because this was something that the band started in boredom time when the PNC time, to become part of the national institution. And then I think they probably used to do it once and then they stop it. Okay? And then now they come to power again, under the coalition, the last 5 years, the coalition re-institute national awards. And I went at least two, and I got to testify to the joy and the happiness of the persons who got the award and their families and the friends, because awardees were like entitled to invite friends and family. And I went at least to two. And I'm telling you, Guyanese, felt, honored that the nation recognized them for the services that they do, and they look forward to it. And I feel that it is a clear demonstration of the continuing hostile attitude of the PPP when it comes to anything that was developed by the previous administration that is not PPP. So they reduce the nation and nationalism to PPP and PPP behavior. And the thing is so bold-faced these days, because they have been criticized consistently on it. They have a chance now to behave a little different. But no, they seem to be fixed in their reckless ways, that they undermine every national institution to reshape it to become PPP institution. I was, they had a national thing at the parliament, and they invite the opposition. So the nation is the PPP, and then the president will stand up and tell people, that he wants to build a one Guyana. I mean, it's nonsense.
Yeah, and dealing with constructive criticism as naysayers. I mean, if you're doing things right, then people are going to give you credit for it. But if you're on a path that is simply seeking to alienate one section of the society, and not even one section, but a particular class, because the poor people are the ones who are victims, whether you're black, Indian, East Indian, and you're seeking to create again a clique to monopolize and to control the resources of the country, and to fill your own pockets in whatever way, whether it's like the accusations are being made with Sue and Jack Deal, that kickbacks are these allegations of kickbacks and these things. Then people must sit back and simply watch and say nothing. That is the point that he's trying to make. And so when you objectively condemn in the interest of the nation, they're saying that you're naysayers. Right? So what message the president is trying to portray for whoever it would be that would have written his speech is that, okay, you must simply sit and accept whatever is being said or done by them. And so the people must be one that is docile, that is willing to pander to the government in whatever way, and a society that is basically not responsive in their own interests. But what kind of society is that if we are to cultivate that kind of society?
Yeah. You see, the PPP is trying to lift themselves beyond criticism. The government we got a perfect government now. Our behavior is beyond criticism. And if anybody try to criticize us, you know, they're crazy. They're crazy. You know, but it demonstrates their whole mindset. They quickly losing it. You know, they begin to believe their own propaganda. You know, that they're so perfect, that they're doing everything right, and that it's just a set of crazy people who can see, you know, the correctness of their policies, and that the set of people who just, you know, peddling a whole set of lies against them. You know, but I mean, in a sense, that might be the indication that okay, that the regime is so degenerate that it's now, you know, in a cycle of self-destruction, because they have lost sight of reality. You know, they've lost sight of reality. I mean, the whole approach to the present situation demonstrates they have lost sight of political reality. They get so power drunk and so overconfident in the fact that they have returned to power that they're losing it. You know, they don't even realize, you know, what they do to themselves, and that's good. Let it continue that way.
Yeah, I'm concerned. I'm concerned.
You are concerned, but you know, sometimes in this struggle, the other side got to self-destruct. You know, to help, and they are on a part of self-destruction. It may not be obvious to them, but as a political person and who pay a lot of attention to these matters, I'm telling you, they have crossed the road of being realistic and objective, and they're on the road of self-destruction.
Yeah, but
they're not seeing reality.
It's difficult to understand that with over 12 years of governance by Jack Deon and the other 11 years of PPP governance with Sam Hines and Sheddy and all Janet, that the elections of 2015 would have come, that they were rejected by the majority of the voting populace for actions which people had deemed as excessive, and the fact that you were saying that they had lost slavery, and you've come back to power, right? And there seems to be no change in the behavior. In fact, it seems to be worse than previously, where the country's resources were seen as the PPP's resources to do and to treat it in whatever way it wants. And now, with the prospect for booming wealth from oil, you are beginning to make it appear that this money is only for the PPP's design, and it's only for a particular section of the nation. Is it that they are so naive that they can't learn from their mistakes, or are they blinded by greed and
They're blinded by greed and power.
power?
That's why I've said they're on a downward march of self-destruction. You know, they have worked themselves into a position. And the PVP believe, you know, that they're in a position now that they're unbeatable.
Okay.
That they're going to be there for, as they said, Jack, this for 40 years. They can't begin to conceive anything that will get them out of power. And with that conviction, that state of mind, you know, they're not looking at things objectively, and not making the kind of rational balance that political actors are expected to make, you know, as you go ahead. All they could see from the eye is money, power, money, power. Well, that's what they see. But it doesn't see the other side of the contradiction, that they also, money, power also creates social conditions that people have more reason to fight them for justice and equality. So as you try to grapple all, you are also creating a situation where more and more people will fight you for the very plenty that you know that you want to grapple. You know? So where objectively you need balance, so that these resources don't become a life or death battle between both sides. way they behave in it, they're making it a life and death battle. So they're caught in their own destruction. But the sad thing is going to also be destruction of the society. Like the destruction, that's sit at the PP's door.
Yeah. But you made a point that Jack Dio is touting the possibility of the PPP being there for 40 years. Don't you see them trying to take the steps to believe that this thought that they have, that they can make it a reality through GCOM, for instance, and the current
Not only GCOM, I think the PPP is on a line of domination. Every year the society watch KPP policy, whether it's GCOM, whether is every area. So GCOM, okay, is important because GCOM is central to what happened in terms of elections and power. So, you know, I mean, the last thing I read about GCOM in the newspapers is that they agreed to do house registration, continuous registration, which was an issue, you know, the opposition commissioners, you know, were resisting in light of the fact that GCOM has not developed on a consensus on how you're going to deal with the bloated electoralists. You know, and everybody during the post-election crisis, locally, internationally, everybody agreed that one of the problems there is the bloated lists. And one would have expected that GCOM would have used the months after the elections to try to build some consensus on this obvious problem. But the PPP wants them to move forward to the local government elections without that being properly addressed, without them, you know, finding some practical and really reasonable way of limiting the negatives on our voters list. You know, as far as I'm hearing, that the chair is fully in the corner as usual. And been another distressing issue in GCOM. You know, another distressing issue that it's slipping me. I read it in the paper. Oh, yeah. And this one is equally distressing. You know, I don't know which one is worse. I mean, GCOM came out of the elections very battered. Get elected left, right, and center. And there's general consensus, both, you know, among all the political parties, all the social forces, that GCOM need to do some, you know, self-examination. And even if there wasn't that a critical mass of criticism in that direction, any responsible organization with the mandate that GCOM has, having experienced such a crisis in the management of the elections, would have seen it first and foremost for self-review and self-inspection to see where we went wrong. We ran 2 local government elections before this 2020 elections. Nobody accused us of, you know, rigging the elections. Nobody accused GCOM of not being able to deliver, you know, fair and free elections. We enter into a massive crisis at the national elections. It is only realistic that the managers of GCOM would have said, look, one of the first things we have to agree on is a clear internal self-examination of all the processes within those elections to identify where there are weaknesses and where we went wrong. And to my surprise, well, not surprising, not no surprising people there, but my surprise with the chair. I mean, she's a judge, and to me these are basic, straightforward matters, and she seems to have problems. Okay, and supporting the PPP's commissioner's position. Let me go forward in local government elections without doing that internal self-examination.
Well, local government is only one, because I'm sure that we can speculate that if we allow them, that there will be no change for national elections when the time comes. Right? So in keeping the bloated list, and the other thing is fortifying GCOM, putting in positions, they're basically trying to change the complexion. I noticed that 3 persons were shortlisted for the deputy CEO position, and they threw them out because all the names that suggest that all three of those persons were Afro-Ghanaians, and then they came up with a new name, and that position was given to the individual. So when I ask if Jack Deo's perception of his dream becoming reality is not one that they are consciously working to ensure happens, particularly with GCOM, a chairwoman who clearly, from all indications, all the evidence, is not showing unbiased behavior in dealing with the matters of the nation and the Elections Commission. And then you have a government that is creating conditions for domination in wealth and for suppression of the people who may oppose them in their behaviors. Then Jack Deo's, in his mind, his dream is not one that is a dream, but is one that he is creating and manipulating the system so that it comes around to the point where that nomination exists. All right? You said that he's a Marxist, he was trained in Russia, and all of these things. And
I didn't say he's a Marxist because I mean Marxist is a very dignified something, you know. He's different in different people. He's trained in
he was
Russia.
trained in Russia. All right. He was trained in Russia, and so he would have possibly learned the tenets and the tactics of agents in the Kremlin and watching Putin's behavior and so on that he would have learned from those people. But I don't know, you're optimistic that something will break camel's back. How far down the road do you see that perspective?
That's a hard one to answer. Put a date or a pin on it is hard. But I'm following the logic of social motion. You know, things come into being and they go out of being. That's a universal principle. So we know at some point the people regime will be defeated. The question is when and how fast. You know, and there's where as political practitioners, our duty, if we want change, we have to begin to engineer the change and hasten, you know, the removal. Okay, but we are not the only players. Recently we saw the Americans with USAID report. The President of the United States in his speech to Ghana's Republican status urged, inclusiveness and so forth. And the Sioux matter, I don't want to divert too far. But what I'm saying, there's both it's going to be internal and external players. Okay, we don't have total control. And then so you got internal players, which we part, okay, the broader internal opposition, both political and social and so. Then you have the external forces, who will play the role for their own interests. And then more important, you got the PPP itself. You see, so destruction could, so in this process, people could self-destroy themselves. And anytime a regime, a set of rulers, become so convinced, that they can't lose power, and that regardless of what, they will get enough money to corrupt everybody. It may be true up to a point, but it may not be true truly. And as I tell you, I don't want to spend much time on PPP, but I want us to learn from our own what the experience with Granger. Granger was convinced that he would have won the next elections. He was convinced that his approach to his coalition partners, minimize them, that Granger is popular enough to do what Borden couldn't do. That he is going to do what Height couldn't do. Height, they used to call Height Desmond Prasad. When Height, had policies play up to the Indian community and so forth and so forth. And he calculated that he's going to get a significant Indian vote. It's going to be a shift. It didn't happen. And Granger made this, convince himself, not that the coalition bring it to power. He feel now he brought himself to power, and he will win the next elections based upon he Granger's, you know, self involvement in the process,
But I
and he
mean,
self-destroyed, self-destruct.
but didn't we contribute to that by saying that Rangers demand this?
Well, in party politics, you gotta promote a candidate in a couple weeks, and everybody,
Yeah, you know,
everybody.
we did it. I know we did it against our
own will.
will and understanding of the nature of the man, right?
But because party politics, you only got a couple weeks before you go to the elections. You got to cut things
we were
short.
looking at the two alternatives.
and you got to think,
But we understood that he was not the best.
But in terms of the people, we making a more scientific, careful judgment. They self-destruct. They don't self-destruct. You trust me. Trust me on it. But we have, you can't left them on their own. We got to hasten the process and to make the contradictions speed up.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's really a sad thing, because our politics and Jack Deo's proclamations, for instance, with the salaries for public servants and so on, he seems to believe that his reasoning is above all others, that we cannot hasten to increase people's salaries because Trinidad did that, and look where they are now. They thought they had the money, and so they carried up salaries, but now, the people have the money and they're not getting the resources as they used to. But is he taking into consideration the current state of the conditions of living of the ordinary people, and this hike in salaries that he's talking about is bringing people up to a level of sanity and good living too much to ask of a government that has resources at its hands, at its fingertips to make life better for people? Why is it that you want to keep them groveling and to keep them wallowing in poverty under this pretext that if they are elevated, their standard of living is brought to some semblance of reasonableness, that it's going to be catastrophic for the country in the long run? What kind of reasoning is that?
I mean, I wrote a letter that addressed that matter of Jack Deon logic a few days ago. You see, you gotta be realistic. Jack Deon is clear in his logic, and he's being, and he wants to say he's being dishonest. Because I think at this matter, Jack Deon just being a political criminal. Jack Deon was schooled in economics, therefore Jack Deon will not be making initial mistakes like a politician, a political leader who may not be schooled in economics. So Jack Deon know what he's saying. Trinidad was involved in oil for umpteen years. And whatever Trinidad is today was being built upon oil. So oil is not only a negative story for Trinidad, oil made Trinidad what Trinidad is. And Trinidad is one of the more developed parts of the Caribbean. It's true that they run into problems down the road, no process, but it didn't happen overnight. The increases in wages of Trinidad workers when they start with oil, it lead to the destruction of Trinidad. It lead to the boom and development of Trinidad for umpteen years. So what it is. Now in more recent times, they run into some problems, but I don't want to spend much time on that. But the logic that Jack Deon, Jack Deon think that the nation is so stupid that he could come with the most obscene and dishonest argument, and because he's the vice president, and because he's supposed to be learned in economics, or whatever he said, people will accept it. And there's a lot of people who will accept it without questioning it.
Okay.
Now, how are you going to tell a nation, first thing you're talking about, this is what, if you significantly increase people's income, certain things is likely to happen. Without stating what's significant, when you're talking, where's the increase you call it significant? You know, so he's not even being like a three-card criminal. You know, he's not saying, look, if I increase wages by 400%, this is significant increase, and this has a likely effects. You know, so he's not doing that. He's not giving you a figure, but he's throwing on this talk about if we increase wages significant. What significant means? And until you define significant, I can't take you serious. You know, and given the level of poverty of the majority of working people and their families, and in this position of plenty, you know, that's criminal behavior. But you see, I try, on this matter I'm so vexed. But I'm vexed with the unions more than vexed with Jack Deon. And that's why today I'm trying to control myself. Because the problem is not Jack Deon.
Well, I'm glad that you have put it that way, because I was myself, when I heard him making the statement, actually wondering what was this man talking about. You know, and people know for a fact that economies grow, the businesses benefit, people's lives are improved, and improved standard of living will place elevate your country to a position where, people may be encouraged to be involved in the economy in a way that they never have been before.
In a nutshell, it's simply what Jack is doing. This is what Jack is doing. Look, different sectors of the society will be making demands for the oil money. Workers are making demands on the oil money, in demanding better wages and salaries, improved social conditions and so on. Okay, Jagio and the clique and the business sector and the interests that you're making for the oil money. So to the extent that he could deny workers and poor people increases in wages, he got more money for himself and his friends and the interests that he represents. That's basically it. But the workers are not organized and determined, to fight, for their portion. And that's the problem you have. As I tell you, every time I discuss this matter, I'm becoming more and more emotional day after day. And because I'm on public TV, I got to control myself. So let me move forward. Don't push me too much on this matter. Let me move forward.
I quite understand how you feel about that. On the last Thursday, you were on Politics 101. Wednesday. With Paul Nerupen's and Dr. Banner's. And we all were discussing oil and the fact that we were dealing with whether oil was for everybody in the whole nation, or whether it should have been for a selected few. How did you find that discussion? What were your concerns about, if you had any concerns about the turn of the discussion?
Okay, as you quite correctly said, I was on Dr. David Hines' program Politics 101, two distinguished gentlemen, comrades, and we had discussing, the topic was Guyana oil wealth, it belongs to all Guyanese. And there's some issues that came out of the discourse which I want to highlight, because at the end of the day, the purposes of those discourse exchanges, in my view, and I guess in the view of the hosts, is to educate people, is to build a spirit of understanding of issues, is to build cooperation, okay, is to, remove myths and falsehoods out of the equation, so the whole spirit of it is to have a engagement in the public space that bear those kinds of things as major objectives. And sometimes when you go on these programs and certain things develop, you have two choices. On the program itself, you don't always want to object to what your fellow contributors are saying, because you don't want the program to degenerate between a fight between, you know, the panelists and divert from, you know, what's the major objective of the thing. And you know, I want to start first with, you know, the DLM, you know, and many people may not remember, it's a political party that evolved in the 80s, and they played a very important, was part of the anti-dictatorial struggle, democratic labor movement, and you know, they participate in the struggle, and I think that you know, we have to salute them. But the leader was on the program, you know, the leader was on the program, and I have a lot of respect for him because he's a person who not only knowledgeable, but he's a person who came and struggled like anybody else and made inputs into the struggle. And I think that, you know, we always have to respect that. But I was disappointed, you know, we came on 2 scores, which I normally I let these things pass. But I think I have to raise it because firstly, you know, he made the point which I think was totally unnecessary, except he deliberately did it. I don't think it's a slip of the tongue. He said that Dr. Hines, nobody gonna listen to Dr. Hines in Guyana. You know? And he's you know, and he's a fringe, you know, of this thing. Now there are 2 aspects of that. He doesn't live in Guyana. He's Indo-Guyanese. We're in an ethnically divided society. And he gonna watch the African community and tell me that we don't listen to voices that argue, you know, over self-interest. I mean, it's one thing for him to say the Indian community don't listen to you, even though I know that's not true, because, you know, but I can live with that coming from an Indian activist, because he may mean in a more profound sense the Indian community, you know, is neither here nor there with who you say. But to watch the nation and watch the African community in the face and tell us that one of our foremost activists at this moment that is, you know, promoting our interests, that we listening to them, it's contempt, you know, and this is what worries me. That among a lot of Indian political activists and leaders, consciously or unconsciously, there's a growing contempt for black people, of African people, and the African community. And they feel they could say where we stand on issues that are intimate to us, and they know who we're listening to. I would never say to an Indian political activist that nobody in Guyana listen to you, because I know Indian political activists listen to Indian leaders and the actors, and it's natural. But you know, there's a contempt coming from Indian activists and leaders, even some of them who would profess to be different. You know, that is mind-boggling. And the second point he made that is very disturbing for me, you know, he was taking the position that race is not a big problem in Guyanese equation. And he actually said that people like David Hines, you know, and people like me and you are African nationalists. And he's against African nationalists. He's also against Indian nationalists. He may probably mean people like Rafi Deon and them, and anybody who argue for ethnic concerns in the equation. He deals with African and Indian nationalists. But more important, he blamed the African and Indian nationalists as being responsible for the present consciousness of Guyanese people, the younger Guyanese, okay? And we are preventing them from reaching some point or enhanced national consciousness. So he presents us as being negative social and political forces. And this is a man who party faced the electorate, unlike in 92. Unlike the WPA, he get destroyed. And then he pack up his bundle and he run out the country look after his personal interests. I am vexed with them because in politics you gotta make a judgment. You come home, you struggle. If the people, I mean, a lot of the his own members of the party don't vote free. You know, many years where he got Indian and African members, you know, the polarization, even the members don't vote free. But he will come back two decades from now and present the racial problem as being the responsibility of the activities of David Hines and Ogunseye and probably Rafi Delv and others, you know. I mean, I've lost a lot of respect for him because I know he knows better. And he only do that, okay, because he was up to that, I won't say mischief, dirtiness, ethnic dirtiness. And I want to call it out for what it is. I am calling it name because I don't want to personalize it.
Yeah, but I have a problem, with David Hines and his show. And I have to say that because he seems to be bringing people out of the woodwork who have gone into the doldrums and giving them, I mean, it's his show, he can do what he wants. But you've got people, for years, the WPA, for instance, were isolated. They were not given a voice in the media, people who were editors and all of these things. You couldn't get a press release into the newspapers. And these same people today he's dragging in and making them, recreating, their image and making them look as though they're, whole new creatures in the political and social sphere. Yeah. I find it really counterproductive to let them remain where if they because they in the times when they had their voices, some of them still got their avenues for their voices. But I don't think we should give them that space to and the likes of this guy, he obviously has an interest in reinserting himself somewhere or the other into the political, and I think this time it's more for personal interest. So, and you notice that with these chaps now, they are holding an Indian nationalist position, and they are unwilling to label the PPP in a sense, or to deal with the election issue as one that is of concern. They're trying to divert it to every other area of the concerns that we have. That the list is not a problem, it's not elections, and so they're circumventing the real issues that are germane to the problems in the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, for anybody to say that David Hines and Ogunseye and yourself and Rafi Delv and others who will be argue in the equation, the ethnic, the dynamics of the thing, is the contributing factor to the racial consciousness, the negative racial consciousness in the society. It's ridiculous. You can tell me, Jagdio, a PPP government that keep African workers' wages in the public sector down for 20 years, starvation wages, and at the same time, the Indian contractors get all the contract. Okay, what I see or what David Hines say, okay, create more racial negative feelings in the equation. A PPP government that killed hundreds of, create a situation that killed hundreds of African people. Okay, you gonna compare what David Hines say about or what Ogunseye say, or Rafi Delv said, or what you, Deon said, or what Kodaki said about the situation in Guyana to match the impact of that slaughter in terms of how to create ethnic consciousness.
And the PPP that lost power because of those same behaviors came back and start killing people again.
So when people like those who I know better. I mean, I could understand ordinary Indian and African people arguing the way. But these are intellectuals. These are some who suppose they will tell you some of the brightest minds we ever produce. And when they behave that way, you know they're being politically dishonest. They're being like political criminals and hustlers. But there's another aspect of the program, and this I see emerging. I mean, recently I have had the opportunity to be more than one programs, and those people have been calling on me out, in the last couple of days. But I've been looking and reassessing the discourse, and I'm looking at the way in which sometimes some of our contributors debate the national issues. And the same thing appear on the particular program that we mentioned Wednesday. You know, central to the discourse, okay, is the question of whether oil well belongs to all Guyanese. And hence you want to discuss, you want to bring a consensus on that. And you get a consensus quickly. There's nobody gonna say oil realty belongs to all Guyanese. So on that you won't have much of a problem. But having said that, the reality is how to make that happen, or what are the chances and the possibility of that happening. And you have now to look at the factors that will possibly prevent it from happening. And in terms of Guyana, you got to discuss race, you got to discuss the political situation. Of politics and race in Guyana is the, well, you know, many people seems not to want to, when we confront the Guyanese reality, they don't want to face these two powerful driving forces in our behavior. You know, race, okay, and politics. You know, even some of them when they're politicians, you know, they don't want anything. And then they will argue what you call trivials. And I think this is important because if we're discussing the problems in the country and where we need to go forward, and somebody bring an argument about we need to repair roads in a particular community, we need to improve education, you know, we need to end poverty. Now, those, you know, as things that we have to have agreement on, that is preventing us from moving forward. I mean, to me, those are non-issues. Guyana have signed on to UN conventions on a lot of those matters, Caribbean Convention, you know, OAS conventions. The point I'm making is that we have had as a nation agreement on the importance of those things. So the issue is not to reach an agreement on those things. We have already had agreement. We even written in the national convention which bind us to end poverty. Okay, the United case the United Nations said by 2030. And all of the things about, you know, improving education, sanitation, roads, the environment, we are bound by conventions. We have already as a country committed ourselves to those things. So to me, those are non-issues. The issue is how well we are doing in making those things a reality. You know, whether we are doing enough, whether we could speed up the processes. So I mean, there's where I could understand a discourse. But when people take, you know, you have an hour to discuss issues, and a lot of time is being spent on what you feel is the non-significant issues. The issues that we already have an agreement on. I grew up here in the small man to be a real man. I grew up here in, we committed to socialism, which is to put power in the working class hand, you know, to end poverty and all of that. You know, so as a nation, we have already developed broad consensus on those things. The problem is to examine ourselves critically and to ask ourselves why we haven't achieved what we already committed to. And to deal with that question, this is what they're running from. You got to face the politics of the country, and the politics of the country, a big dimension of it is race and the racial problems in the equation. And they don't want to deal with that. So we spend a lot of time left with getting the people off the hook. Because Jack Dale could always respond this is why he responded. We got a lot of convention agreement on all of these matters, they're not the issue. You know, so I'm hoping that, you know, our contributors, especially those in the African community, you know, were more careful. And you got to be bold and focused. If you don't define the problem properly, you're not going to find the solution. If you skirt around the issues, you know, you only help the government. There's one more issue I want to raise, and it's come out. Just quickly,
yeah.
It was on another program that they had Brother Eric Phillips and Eric Phillips and this agriculture export
Dr.
Simpson. It was an excellent program, you know, which was very inspiring and so forth. But there's a political point I want to make in the program. You know, in presenting what things they feel that will help in the present condition to alleviate the African condition, you know, they're making the point that, you know, the opposition, you know, is not doing what they ought to do. They should carry these things to the government. failing to recognize that the government have said to the opposition, we can't do no business with you until you recognize the government. So to blame the opposition of not taking certain initiatives to the government, it's counterproductive and only helps the PPP. Because the opposition is in no position to carry anything to the government, which the government will respond, positively, because the government position is unless you don't accept, the results that of the elections, that is a legitimate government, no business. So I just want to make that point.
But regardless of whether you accept or not, you can still be no business.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
Yeah, I know.
as political actor, as actors, social activists, and political actors, you have to be more careful. But they had an excellent program.
Yeah, because the PPP really doesn't want to be in any way. They want, like we said, dominate, control, and make decisions on their own for every aspect of life, because they believe the money is for them and for the people who are surrounding them. So every act, every move, every scheme is a scheme that is set for domination and for giving the resources to right? So even it's obvious, man, but we'll talk more about that when we have more time. It's been like it usually is. It's a pleasure having you discussing these matters in such an enlightening way. I hope that sooner than later that people will return to that mood of willingness to fight, willingness to represent themselves in the scheme of things, and taking action in their own interests, so that in whatever way possible, the PPP can come around to it, that being on ticket, and that they should begin to, in some way or the other, regardless of what way, get the understanding that enough is enough. All right? You have to take action. Individually or collectively, we have to take a stand. All right, do have a good night. I look forward to being with you next week. Same time, same channel, for another program of Walter and the Groundings. See you.